Sure. Thanks, Jeff. Nice to meet everyone, those who I haven't met yet, and thanks for coming out. Excited for the discussion. I'm Sherrod Davis, born and raised here in Baltimore, Maryland. I went to school down in North Carolina, Davidson College, majored in philosophy. Upon graduation, people ask, what the hell are you going to do with philosophy? I don't know. So I went to grad school at Wake Forest, got my master's in management, worked in Winston-Salem for about 1.5 years for a large data analytics consulting company called Inmar. And then I moved back to Baltimore. I started an advertising technology company with a couple of my buddies. The premise was centered around using video advertisements in order to raise money for charity. It was called AdWap. It was a huge failure, but it was an awesome learning experience and really whet my appetite for entrepreneurship in general. After that, I went to a data privacy company in Canton called TrackOff. Last May, we were acquired by Avast Software. There, I was a VP of operations. So anything that didn't fall under sales or engineering reported up through me. So really got to experience a wide variety of things in terms of helping to support a business and building it in order to scale and grow. And now, like I mentioned, I'm the chief of staff at PROTENUS. We are a healthcare compliance analytics company. So we have artificial intelligence technology that we provide to mostly hospitals and health systems to help them manage issues of compliance, specifically privacy and drug diversion. You're muted, Jeff, if you're talking.
Hello. All right, let's try that again. Thank you, Sherrod.
Yeah.
Still getting the technical difficulties down. Matthew, I'm going to throw it over to you. Do a quick intro, and then we'll get the last two, and we'll start our discussion.
Awesome. Thank you. Super happy to be here, and thank you for having me, Jeff and Chris. Hey, everybody. My name's Matthew Lowinger. Originally from greater Washington, D.C. area, in a neighborhood and community called North Potomac. Came up here, and I actually worked with Sherrod over at TrackOff. So Sherrod is the man, super cool dude. So now I am with BYTELION, BYTELION, BYTELION. We're a custom software dev company just north in Hunt Valley. We build SaaS companies, websites, analytics platforms, and everything, and any software really in between. We work with startup clients and also large clients such as Hopkins, Pier 1 Imports, DoD, and more. So yeah, that's a little about me.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. All right, let's hop over to Anand. Anand, make sure you're unmuted and feel free to give us a little info on yourself.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Anand Macherla. I am a data analyst at T. Rowe Price. I'm originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I went to the University of New Mexico and graduated with a degree in economics and international business. While I was in undergrad and a little bit afterwards as well, I started a company, and with two of my really good friends. It was an arts enterprise. And we traveled all over the country, really, selling to different galleries and whatnot, and just had a phenomenal experience with it. Really, that was my first time with small business and entrepreneurship, and I realized that this is what I want to do for a little bit longer. So decided to join a fellowship called Venture for America that works with entrepreneurs or those who are interested in entrepreneurship and startups. That brought me to Baltimore, where I now work at as a data analyst at T. Rowe Price. So not quite a startup, but very startup adjacent. T. Rowe has an innovation lab down south of Baltimore in Linthicum, and there they utilize a host of startup-like structures, startup-like cycles to pump out new material and new products and services for the financial industry. Outside of that, have my hand in a few other things as well. Looking to, I mean, we all have side projects these days, I guess, including now, and working with a few startups in Baltimore to understand how they can navigate the current COVID crisis now.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Lolita, thank you for joining us tonight. If you don't mind hopping on real quick and giving us a little intro about yourself, we would appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us, Jeff. And hi, Sherrod and Matt and Anand, good friends. And Siobhan, too. I see you guys. Thank you for showing up. Well, my name is Lolita Taub. I am, during the day, chief of staff as well as head of sales for one of our brands at Catalyte, a workforce company. And then outside of my day job, I wear a few other hats. One is an angel investor. I also invest through NEXTGEN Venture Partners. I'm a scout for Indie VC. I am also on the venture committee for the Veneta Project, which supports local DMV female founders. So if you want to have any more information on them, I'm happy to share. And yeah, that's basically me, operator and investor, originally from LA. Undergrad was International Relations Global Business, an MBA. I've been in tech for 14 years. Enterprise tech has been really the thread in corporate, startup, and venture capital. And happy to be here to be of service to the community. I've been in Baltimore less than a year, but I love it. And I think maybe you can see a little bit of my view. I think it's such a beautiful place, Baltimore, so I'm happy to be here and supporting the ecosystem.
Awesome. Thank you, Lolita. Thank you, everybody. It looks like we're going to be doing our next in-person Startup Grind event from Lolita's apartment because that view is awesome. So thank you for sharing that with us. So let's get into our topic today. So obviously we are talking about using technology to weather the storm. So let's kind of, go through the panel. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes like we discussed, and like everybody knows that have happened over the past few weeks. So since all this has happened, what has been the biggest issue that you guys have faced? Whoever wants to hop in and start, feel free.
Hi, Stephen Goodman here. I would say the biggest issue that I'm facing is finding enough Zoom meetings. Considering my bread and butter is networking events and trade shows and going to the martini bars to meet individuals, the business traveler, the widows, the people that are just want to drink high-class martinis up in the Bygone at the Four Seasons. That's what I do. So I'm a financial advisor for Morgan Stanley. So wherever I can find wealth is where I go to. So I need more and more Zoom meetings, and it's not enough. I need more. So if any of you guys have more meetings that I could potentially join, I'm not selling anything. I'm just looking to meet people and looking to join in on the conversation. So if any of you guys have any more meetings that I could potentially join, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy.
Yeah, everybody's always asking for more meetings. That's always been, no, it's never been the go-to, but I hear what you're saying. Anybody on the panel have any feedback on that?
I could definitely jump in. Thank you, Stephen. I can understand that you want more meetings. So one of the biggest challenges I think all of us as operators are facing are customers pausing, stopping, going bankrupt, pulling their people off their teams because they're trying to survive the COVID environment. And so I'd say that that's similar to, from an operator perspective, that's something that we're looking at and trying to see, how do you navigate through an environment where companies are reducing their spend, are tightening their purse straps, while we still need to continue to grow, and the targets that we have don't necessarily shift And if we do have to move people around or people have to go, how do we do more with less? And that's really where technology comes in and is able to not substitute, but support those of us who are taking on additional roles. Because as I mentioned, I'm currently both chief of staff and head of sales for one of our brands. And without technology, I could not do it.
Matthew, Sherrod, Anand, any big issues that you guys have faced since we've made this shift?
I think for me, the hardest thing is the fear of the unknown. You know, there is obviously, well, you know, this will end, but you know, like when and how our world will change, you know, through technology, through e-commerce, through marketing, you know, list goes on. So I think for me that you know, just trying to stay upbeat, positive, but I would say that the fear of the unknown is my biggest thing.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always tough going through change because inevitably it feels like you're losing momentum. And so I think for us at PROTENUS, especially, even though we were well equipped to support a work from home environment, there's a reason that we've, I think, been working in offices for however long we've been working, right? There's some value in serendipity. There's some value in human connection. And so replacing that or trying to recreate that for me, especially personally, because I get a lot of value out of that and I get a lot of energy from that, has been super difficult. So frankly, and Jeff did not pay me to say this, but things like this are super helpful to try and recreate some of that magic, so to speak. And then additionally, something that I try and do is input that into my process. So you'll hear me probably talk about process a lot. So if you get annoyed, just like put me on mute. But I've gotten into the habit of like reaching out to someone new and reaching out to someone that I already know, reconnecting with, in order to try and replace like running into someone in the hallway or overhearing a conversation that I might get value from. So it's just about being, I think, a little bit more intentional. So for me, just to wrap this up, I can talk a lot, but serendipity and human connection, I think trying to recreate that, replace that has been tough.
Anand, anything on your end?
Yeah, I think to just add on to that, I mean, the part that I've been missing the most is the emotional connection. We talk about this all the time, but like I think that my family, we have a lot of healthcare workers in the family, and I think the biggest challenge I've had to face is like, how do you support people from a distance when, you know, they're so tired or they're so overworked that even like calling can seem like a burden to them. They are just drained by the end of the day. So how do you support others from a distance? How do you support others from like even when calling is a mental space, that it takes up mental space at this point? I haven't fully answered that question myself. I think I'm still trying to figure it out, but I think like meetings like this are super useful, as we're seeing in the chat. Even people are, you know, throwing out their WhatsApp and their, let's see, Skype accounts. I think that spaces like these are definitely needed in a point of time like this.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Yeah, and again, feel free to use the chat, throw as much information up there. You know, as far as being able to still connect and you know, have that personal interaction, you know, that's why we're trying these breakout rooms. Obviously, networking is really difficult, or networking is just difficult now because you can't have as much of a face-to-face conversation when you're in one of these big, you know, Zoom meetings where there's 20, 30, 40 people in there. You can't have those connections. So we're doing the best we can. I think Lolita had mentioned it. There's a ton of Startup Grind doing virtual events. That's one of the big shifts that we've done. So normally, I mentioned this earlier, we're all about Baltimore. We certainly still are, but we know we've got a lot of participants tonight from all over the country and even international. We have our Canadian friends are here tonight as well. So again, it gives you the opportunity to really kind of broaden your horizons, which is a plus. You know, for me, one of the biggest issues I faced, I normally work remotely. You know, I work out of my home office most of the time, but traditionally it's just me in the house. And now I've got my wife and I've got my kids. So it's really kind of staying focused with all the distractions. And then of course, knowing that you can't go out and do that business development the way you usually do because those events aren't going on. So it's really, you know, how do you make those adjustments? Technology, obviously being able to use Zoom, being able to make those connections has been huge. So, you know, really appreciate some of that feedback. You know, let me kind of start bouncing around too. Sherrod, you know, you being in kind of the healthcare space, you know, how do you feel like your response to this crisis is different, being that you're kind of more involved in it to an extent?
So yes and no. I think my belief, Jeff, I think, is that it just heightens what everyone needs to do, frankly, in my opinion. So the approach we've taken is we've stopped selling totally, which may or may not be right for everyone, but the focus now is just on the customer and being supportive. It's not trying to necessarily increase our bottom line, at least for our own customers, given that they are in healthcare. It's just to simply support them. And as they start to get furloughed and as they start to shift their priorities, we need to serve as a resource for them first and foremost. And so, you know, that's one of our values. And push come to shove, when things get difficult, like, do we stand up to those values? I think that that's the test for everyone right now. And so we'll be really curious to figure out how that unfolds. For us as a company, our focus is on shifting from being a nice to have product to being a necessity. And so that's really our focus internally, is how can we reposition ourselves for the end user or for the decision maker, so that way they feel like, okay, during this crisis, after this crisis, we need PROTENUS. And we might need PROTENUS because of the customer support. We might need PROTENUS because of the technology. And so trying to identify those real pain points that we can support, that's been our focus. And so within healthcare, I just think that it elevates the level of that we need to capture in order to do that.
Awesome, awesome. Anybody else want to kind of chime in on that from our panel? All right, we can pop into our next question. This one, Matt, you know, this is a question you and I had talked about. You know, where are you seeing improvements in processes since this shift has happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So at BYTELION, I manage 2 products, and they are both mobile applications. So something that I have seen a lot, especially now, is that mobile app usage is through the roof now. I mean, people they are at their houses, you know, just, you know, lying on their couches, you know, doing work, etc. I was reading the other day that that Facebook now, I mean, they are doing crazy hiring just to try to keep up with all of the new users and demand. So that is something that I've seen. Also, I believe that that people are they are purchasing new hardware technology. You know, some people they may have, you know, laptops at their work or phones, but now we are at home. So so people they have to purchase, you know, new new computers, new phones, etc., just to try to change and pivot and adapt.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you know, there are opportunities out there. There are things that are changing and improving because of the current situation. So again, it's I don't want to look at it positively because it's not a positive situation, but there are silver linings. There are opportunities that are out there. You know, so being in that situation, even Sherrod mentioned it, you know, making that shift from being a nice to have to a necessity. You know, we're reevaluating a lot of things that are happening now, and a lot of this technology that we said, yeah, that can help us along, that could be a benefit. Now it's not nice to have. It's definitely something that we need to have. I mean, Zoom was always one of those platforms, and I know there's a whole bunch of them out there that were like, yeah, you know, that's a good replacement. And now it's become the go-to. So platforms like that and all the other platforms that are out there, which you know, really kind of leads me to my next question, which is more for the group, but, you know, what tools, programs, platforms are out there that you've used or that you've been a part of that you would recommend to kind of keep productivity at the same level or even at a higher level as we kind of, you know, go through these changes?
I can jump in really quickly. Sorry, Lolita. Just to piggyback off what you and Matthew said, I think that it's, for us at PROTENUS, we've been technology forward. Like, we've had that luxury, I think. You know, we have Zoom rooms. We've always used Slack. The nuts and bolts, I think, are there. But from my perspective, those are just tools to emphasize what's important within the organization already, right? So right now, for example, you asked Matthew about the processes that are changing. So at PROTENUS, we are over communicating now, right? Like, I talk to people 2, 3, 4 times a day sometimes about the exact same thing. We just have standing meetings in order to ensure that we're on the same page, because you don't have the opportunity to drop by their desk, and maybe some things aren't captured in Slack or email. And so I'm curious what Anand, Lolita, and Matthew have to say about the tools. But from my perspective, I think that the tools emphasize the values and the process to begin with. So.
See, it's not as smooth when we're on Zoom, but go ahead, Lolita.
I'll jump in. I mean, I actually polled the Twitter fam about what are the tools beyond Zoom and Slack, because those are givens. What are people using to stay productive amid, and then what do we think is going to help us get beyond getting through COVID? And there's so many answers, so many different cool technologies out there. I'm gonna put the Twitter URL in there so you can see like everybody's recommendations. But at the top of my personal list, when I think about the team, Slack is super important, but one of the biggest ones for me from a sales perspective is CRM. So Salesforce to me is super important. More than ever is it important to capture notes, see where things are moving, have good hygiene on the CRM, to understand where the business is, what's the pipeline, and what do we need to do to keep it moving to close deals. Or I don't remember who it was, maybe Matt said that we're not selling anymore. But we are selling, but we are being really empathetic. The message from our team is really, hey, be there for our customers. Let's do everything we can, educate them as we're going through this, because we all are having to relearn how to do a lot of things or look at the world in a different way. But at the same time, be really focused on building that pipeline, because after this is over, we need to make sure we've captured it in some sort of technology to keep it going so we can close deals and keep growing. So I would call that one out in particular. A personal one that helps me live my life and not go crazy is using Calendly. I think it's an underrated tool that some people don't know about or haven't used. But Calendly, for those of you who may not be aware, it makes it super easy to link it to your calendars. And then anytime you need to set a meeting, you just send someone a link and it already has all of your availability and you don't have to worry about anything. And all those 10 emails that it used to take you to set up a meeting, now it just took one and it was just that URL. So those are my two: having a really great CRM for business and for personal life, making sure that you're slotting in the times where you can have meetings. So then you can have some downtime, because productivity is a question mark right now. We're all going through this global traumatizing event. And I think it's more important than ever to take pauses. And so for that, there are also apps, right? So are you using like a meditation app or something like that? I actually recommend using apps that block you from using social media. I use one myself because if you're too long on the news feed, sometimes that could be bad for your mental health. So those are my couple of tidbits in terms of technology.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. A personal favorite of mine is GitLab. So GitLab is actually the world's largest remote work company, and they have a gold mine of resources on their website about how you can actually work remotely. And so when these shutdowns started taking place, when people were encouraged to work from home, GitLab really aggressively pushed themselves to be like, hey, use as a resource. And so I've read through a lot of their stuff. They have remote playbooks. They have a remote manifesto. They have like an emergency plan. Like, how do you set your space up at home so that you're actually able to be productive? They just have a wealth of resources that I really encourage like startup leaders and people who are in decision-making roles, like maybe look through GitLab's resources. That being said, like GitLab in my line of work is also super important because we're actually able to push things to like a safe repository for others to look at. I also love to use Trello to track my tasks, and because I can be forgetful sometimes, or because my projects might take months and months and months before I open them up again. Trello has been super useful to dig through my old notes again to see, like, where was I on this assignment? Where was I on this task? Who do I need to touch base with? Who do I need to share it with? So especially for moments like these when we're all working remotely with our own teams, I think Trello is also a great one.
Awesome. Yeah, and I most of those tools are tools that have been out there. They're not brand new tools. They're not tools that were invented just for this situation, and they're not tools that at the end of this you're going to stop using. I mean, everything that you guys mentioned are all great efficiency and productivity tools, and they're going to enhance your productivity while you're in this situation. So thanks for all those great tips. Again, we're going to put this out on YouTube, so if you missed any of those or weren't taking notes, you can go back and listen to them. So Lolita, question for you. What have you seen and or heard from other companies that seems to be working or not working, or from the companies that you work with? Where they're, obviously we talked about a couple of the tools that have made you more productive, but are there things out there that you've seen companies do that just raise red flags, or are there things beyond that that you say, wow, this is a great way to embrace this situation?
Yeah, so I think that, for example, we've mentioned some great tools, right? Slack or Zoom or any kind of communication tool is really great. But one misuse I've seen is not turning on your video camera. That is so simple, but it can make a really big difference because people can see you as a human and feel more engaged. Because when you're not on camera, people are usually not paying attention. But if you are, you're like curious about people's faces and things like that. So my tip is, if you are working on a team, encourage people to use a camera. It may seem simple, but it makes a really a big difference in culture and dynamic and bringing the community together. And then what else would I say I'm seeing that may not be working as well? I think that people, again, sales is on my mind a lot these days. And one thing that I'm seeing people use sales tools for, like SalesLoft or LinkedIn Navigator or whatever you may be using for your sales, there are ways of just like copying and pasting, comms to prospect and things like that. And I'm sure everyone gets emails every day that feel like spam, that are like, Mrs. whatever, like literally sometimes they even don't put the name. It says like Mrs. Client, and you're just like, what? And so the misuse of this technology that can expand and amplify our reach and connection, I see them being misused. And today, more than ever, people are seeking connection. So any kind of communication that's being thrown out there that is not personalized, that isn't really thoughtful and thinking about how can I solve your problem, Jeff, and not just Mr. Client's problem, we have helped everything. I think those are some of the two biggest misuses I've seen in the last couple of weeks.
Anybody else on the panel have any info or any thoughts on misuse or best practices or anything like that during this situation?
I think a best practice for me, in terms of kind of operationally, if that's a word, or process. So I live in a tiny studio apartment, so everything is in one tiny room. So I think that for me, having spaces where I know that I can work versus lounge around or sleep, etc. So like now we are all at home. So I think that I think that like everything is now lumped into one, work and leisure. So having these two separate workspaces, workspace versus lounging around, has really helped me out. Yeah, that's what I'll say to that.
I think another thing too, and this is coming from somebody who regularly works from home. So for me, like I said earlier, the adjustment isn't where I'm working. It's the, the surroundings, the different people that are in here, and just the fact that now everybody's in that. One of the things that I always do is, I keep a schedule. And even while all this is going on, it's still getting up at the same time, taking a shower, having my breakfast before I start, really trying to keep with that rather than staying in my pajamas all day. And, because when you're on video calls, nobody can see you from here down. So I could be, I'm not going to tell you what I'm wearing down there, but I could be wearing anything down there. So trying to, get
now you have to stand up for us, Jeff.
No, I'm not going to do it because I'm down there. But I, it's keeping you in that mindset of, I'm not just in my house. I'm not just hanging out watching Netflix and listening to Spotify while I do work. I'm doing work, and you can still have your background stuff on, but it's really kind of trying to keep yourself with that schedule that you would have if you were in an office. I read an article recently where it was somebody that was saying that they're not camera ready. And this kind of goes to what you were saying, Lolita, where, and again, at the beginning of this meeting, I asked everybody to turn their camera on. And there was a woman just saying how she was in a meeting and they asked her to put her camera on, and she wasn't camera ready. Her hair was a mess. She hadn't gotten dressed. She hadn't done whatever. And, one of the points that she made too is get up, get dressed, get ready. You don't know when that meeting that you thought was a phone call is actually a Zoom meeting. And you're going to need to be on camera. And it gets you mentally prepared to still be working. So those are, a couple things that I think work or don't work depending on how you react to it. Anand, question for you as our resident data expert. How can businesses use past data from before all this happened to help improve present performance? Are there areas that businesses should be tracking throughout this crisis to really help them prepare for what's going on now, as well as to prepare for the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think now more so than ever, it's important for companies to show that they are understanding of the global situation. I want to take that question in a few different ways. When you look towards the data that is normally collected, oftentimes, in my experience, you can just look at data as numbers, right? And ultimately, there are people behind those numbers. And so tracking the different ways in which people are interacting with your software, with your services, with your product, I think would also cue in to see how the current pandemic has affected them and their way of living and their way of working and their way of connecting. And I think that ultimately, like, we as, you know, business leaders in our community and like community or company leaders, we can do a better job of showing that we are cognizant that our clients are more than just, you know, they're not just filling our coffers, but they are really human beings at the end of it. So I think that it's crafting our solutions to be more understanding, whether that means like providing services at a lower rate, or whether that means pivoting entirely, and maybe it's like creating PPE for healthcare workers, whatever it is. I think that like we need to be looking at our data more stringently than ever before, not only to track the data, but to create the right narrative around the data and really understanding the circumstances and scenarios that our clients are facing now, in anticipation that we can then create better solutions for them and adding value.
Awesome, awesome. Anybody else have any input on usage of data? I know Anand's our data expert here, but I don't know if anybody else deals with that or pokes around with it. Obviously, data is very important, you know, and this kind of goes back to what Lolita was talking about before with using a CRM and making sure you're tracking who you're talking to, what you're talking about, how you're using that, not just now, but obviously once we get out of this, being able to go back and say, hey, we talked during the crisis. I know you had some issues or some holdups then. Obviously, you know, I know with me, and I'm sure a lot of you are experiencing this as well, a lot of deals you had on the table or a lot of things you were working on or projects were all put on hold. And being able to consistently communicate, know where you left off, know where that pause button was hit so that you can press play when all this starts up again, is certainly going to be extremely valuable. You know, I don't know if you guys, any of you on the panel, have any input in, you know, just obviously beyond just using a CRM, of tracking where you were, tracking where projects maybe were paused, or where you had to make a pivot to be able to shift yourself back to, you know, your normal flow, either during or after this crisis.
I add one more, or sorry, go ahead, Lolita.
Okay, I have to interrupt because this is such a great quote, and I have to shout out Jeremy Stevenson for having such an awesome quote. He says, data is like toilet paper these days, gold. It's so true, isn't it? Okay, Anand, setting you up for amazing gold information.
That's a lot of hype. Comparing my statements to toilet paper. I don't think that's ever happened before. That's fantastic. I will say too that I think that COVID is not like a fixed event. It's not a fixed point in time and space, right? It's constantly evolving, and it's reaching out and affecting us in more ways than we can count. I also think that when it comes to collecting data now, we should use that data to become more prepared for the next phases of the COVID, you know, pandemic, and how it affects our work life as well, right? So it's not just, okay, let's just collect all this information now to understand where our customers are at, where our clients are at, but it's also how can we use this to prepare for the next phase of COVID, or the next crisis that we might endure as a nation, or as a country, or as a world. So I think it's taking the lessons learned to really be prepared for the next phase of the epidemic or another concern that might come up.
But you know, Anand, I don't think any of us really know what's going to happen. And so I think I love what you're saying, and I love using data to understand how to prepare for the future. But I think more than ever, data needs to be fresh, and you need to refresh it and take a new look at what you are coming, what's hitting your data set, right? I know I'm super lucky. I actually have a data scientist on my team, and he's actively working on, you know, where our dollars are being spent, as opposed to what the data is saying in terms of where, if we put $1 in, how many do we get out for specific ads, for example? I mean, just being very mindful of the freshness of data is, I think, really important, and also being able to chop it up into bits and look at it from a different perspective, because what we're going through, nobody's ever gone through before, And so coming up with hypotheses and experimenting and adjusting really quickly, the whole like startup thing is something everyone has to get used to, where you have a thesis, a hypothesis, and you're going out to test it, and then you see what happens, and you hopefully have a feedback loop that gives you data that then you can assess and say, hey, is this working? Is it not? Should I pivot? So that you're not spending all the money and all the time that you have, because all of those resources are so limited at this time.
Awesome, awesome. And then I just want to kind of bring back up what Lolita said before, which is there's some great points going on here on the chat. So certainly make sure you check that out. A lot of people have some great advice. I saw Sherrod was talking about, making sure your space is organized properly. Again, it's your work mentality. So, if your office is immaculate, but your place where you're working at home is not, get your place at home immaculate so that you're kind of working in that same mentality. If your office is a mess, well, maybe you should still keep your home office a little bit clean too. But you want to kind of keep yourself in that same space. And again, remember, whatever's behind you is what's being broadcast to whoever it is that's on your meetings as, hey, this is my workspace. So from here forward, do whatever you want. But from here back, just like from here down, do whatever you want. You want to make sure that, that space is right. And I think Lisa had a great point too of talking about wear actual pants that don't have elastic in them, because it's going to keep your weight in check. I know, with being home and having access to the amount of dishes that my household has accumulated over the past 3 weeks is insane. But again, the temptations are all there. When you're in an office, it's even a bathroom break is a lot more of a mission. You got to get up, you got to, maneuver down there. Here, you can just keep taking breaks all you want. So whatever you can do to kind of keep you focused. And, I'm really talking more about the technology as well. We talked about some great software. What factors, or are there other factors that people should be taking into account when they're choosing the right system and making sure that they're not just getting something that they're going to use for this next couple of months or however long this lasts, and then at the end of it, it's no longer useful, making sure they're kind of future-proofing themselves. So if they're going to adopt and train themselves on new software, that it's going to be something that's going to continue with them. Are there things that companies or business owners should be thinking about?
So I hate to keep harping on this, but for me, it's like, what do you want the outcome to be? A, and then B, what are you doing right now in order to achieve that outcome, right? So if I want the outcome to be the replication or an artificial physical connection, right? Then you need Zoom, you need Google Hangouts, you need some way to see someone's face. If I am trying to share my to-do list with someone, right? Like to Anand's point, maybe you want Trello. So I think as a business owner, as an operator, as someone who's making decisions, or my recommendation would be to begin with the end in mind. What is the intended outcome? And then you can work backwards and find the tools that can help you achieve that. If Lolita wants to keep track of notes and be able to follow a prospect from initial outreach all the way through close, there are obvious tools that can help her to do that. It's just a matter of determining, I think, what that outcome is.
Yeah, great point. I definitely want to not follow notes, but deals that lead to dollars. But good point, Sherrod. I think there's a couple of people who have really great thoughts in here. So David Cross asks about what do we think the future holds? And I think this is also relevant when asking what should we consider in proving that the tech we choose will be good now and in the future. I think that requires you to have a hypothesis of what's going to happen. And many in the industry, we believe that work from home is not something that's going to go away. There may be that it shifts, but remote work from now on, I personally believe will be a thing. So if that's the case, start thinking, if you also agree with this and you believe this, then it's really important to have all the technology that allows you to have that seamless remote work. And lean into it, right? And build the processes that maybe were typically in person, try to build them online. Now that can be really limited for companies that have factory floors and you do really require physical attendance. But even then, how can you adjust for this new normal? What kind of technology can enable you to run your business? But Sherrod made a really great point that was at the top of my mind, which is, what are you trying to accomplish? Technology shouldn't be the ends of a means, but rather a means to an end. So if you reverse engineer, think about what you're trying to achieve, what's that next milestone? That could be too short-sighted. Maybe you think about what overall you're trying to really accomplish. What do you need to be successful, and what are the tools that are going to help you get there? That's what's going to help you make that decision, because some technology is really expensive and others are not. And so if it's not too expensive, you can trial and error. But if it's going to be something that is quite expensive, you need to really reverse engineer into that thought of what am I trying to accomplish?
And just to jump in again, I think during this pandemic, people are not spending as much money in general, right? So you can't get yourself locked into a year-long SaaS product that you don't end up using, especially right now, given all of the uncertainty. And so at PROTENUS, we've been really frugal about getting out of a lot of those, frankly, and then also just doing makeshift things as well. Like, is there a way that we can make this happen with Google Drive, Google Docs, Google Sheets, and not have to spend that money on Tableau? So I think that's why, to Lolita's point, it's imperative to figure out like what it is you're trying to accomplish. What's the minimum viable product in some ways? And so then you can piece things together in order to accomplish that.
I love Tableau, so I will always recommend Tableau. I think it's brilliant. But one thing I will say to add on to that point is something to consider is that security of an app, security of a product, security of a service is also imperative, especially, Sherrod, you're dealing with like healthcare data, right? So in my world, like financial data, like personally identifiable information, security is like at the top of mind for those I work with. And maybe not looking at technologies as like a quick solution to one small workflow that you have now, but how you can integrate that into your entire operations. When you think of it more like that, then security becomes a more pressing issue.
Yeah, I think
that was my point, Anand. You stole it.
No, I agree though, and Matt, if this was where you were going to go, I mean, security is a huge part of it. There's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of options out there. There's going to be more, I'm sure, that are created by this pandemic. So, to your point, figure out what it is that you need to do. What is it that you have lost since you have moved to a remote workspace that you need to fill those gaps? Not that it's the tools that are driving it. It's the goals and it's the needs that your company has that then should be back-ended with the tools. And of course, if you can find less expensive tools, especially now when spending has been cut back, use them. See what you can get out of them. If you find out their shortcomings and there's not a way around it, then increase yourself to other tools that are out there. Sherrod, I know you mentioned a couple like the Google Suite. Are there other free tools out there that you guys would recommend that companies could try to just say, hey, does this fill this gap? Maybe it's just a temporary solution, but it's a lot more cost effective than some of the more expensive platforms that are out
there. I think that, there, like HubSpot, which is a marketing tool plus sales, they are offering, free trial programs, for like 3 to 6 months. Also at BYTELION, we use a tool called Jira, and kind of like Trello, Jira tracks workflows mostly for mostly for like tech and software products. So I know that Jira now, especially, they are offering some highly discounted products and services now. Yeah, so that's what I'll say to that.
Hey, Jeff, real quick, I don't know what time we're coming up on the Q&A, but it might be helpful for people in the chat to just throw in like what they are trying to accomplish, and then we can probably be a little bit more helpful in terms of what tools we would recommend in order to do that.
Yeah,
I can list off, a bunch of free ones, but I think that would just give me a little bit more focus to try and help folks if that's a challenge for them.
Sure, yeah. That's a great point. So rather than laundry listing them out, and I kind of threw that question in there just because I knew we were talking about some of those, and I think that is a great solution. So, if you guys, everybody out there, are running into some things, and I see Anthony's putting out some suggestions too. If you have suggestions of apps that you've used or you have pain points you're running into, put them out there. When we get the Q&A, we'll make sure we hit that. I just kind of want to do one or two more quick questions for the group, and then we'll switch over to the Q&A. Sherrod, good point, kind of keeping an eye on the time, and I think we're getting close to when we were going to switch over to that. So one of the questions that I did have, I know we're talking tech, and I know we've gotten off topic a little bit here and there where we're talking about workspace and mentality and how do you prepare yourself, but what other areas do you think businesses should really be focusing on right now to help them weather the storm? In each of your opinions, are there areas that you say, okay, we've had to pivot from our main focus or our main execution? What are things that companies who maybe had their client base put things on hold, or sales aren't, really the focus, like you mentioned, Sherrod, that they should be focusing on during the next, few weeks, months, however long this lasts for?
So I think the first thing that I would focus on would be what's important to you as a company, right? So PROTENUS has a really strong culture. We're super invested in our values. And so the very first thing our CEO said transparently was that the most important thing for him is to make sure that everyone is okay. Us in the company, the customers, right? Like people are now talking about, people over profits, people over process. But that's got to be something that you believe, because when push comes to shove, you're going to have to make that choice. And so the first thing I would look at is, are we built on the values that we want to reflect? A. And then B, I would look at internally, this is something that we did at PROTENUS as well, the resources that you're going to have. So we had, for example, an office manager at PROTENUS, right? There's no more office. But the CEO and I had an hours-long conversation about her skill set and where she can provide value now. And we went through the entire company and mapped out various scenarios that suggested, okay, if this customer leave, or if this group of customers leave, what is this person going to do? So I think it's about identifying the abilities that already exist within your team and then leveraging them. I was listening to a podcast today by a guy by the name of Scott Case, who's the CEO at Upside, which is a travel company. And so he literally tweets out, like, everyone should stop traveling, right? Like, that is his belief, obviously, which is smart. But now he's outsourcing his sales team. He's outsourcing his customer success team to companies that are overburdened for whatever reason. And so I think A, identify your values, what's important, and B, identify the resources that you have internally and how you may best be able to best leverage that.
Absolutely. No, I think those are some great points. Anybody else have any things, to focus on over the next few weeks, months, however long this lasts?
Outside of technology, I think one of the things that I haven't heard enough of from a business perspective or company perspective is mental health. From an individual perspective, yes, there's many apps floating around, but this is a time of high stress and anxiety. And I think being able to forgive ourselves for our level of productivity or lack thereof on a daily basis is really important. Making it a point to say, hey, this is just reality, and we need to be kind and empathetic towards each other on teams, but not just with our teams and ourselves, but also with our customers. And as we're going through everything, just being really mindful of the fact that before we put on our hats, whatever hats we wear, whether it's startup founder or ecosystem builder or, whatever it may be, that we're humans. And this is such a great moment to really celebrate that part and make space for it. And for us, that has meant to throw silly Zoom parties. So the last one was a hat Zoom party, and we all wore hats and we all told stories about our hats. And the next one is going to be a literary drink themed happy hour. So basically we're planning on making a drink and having it tied to our favorite book, and we're just going to get to know each other. And I think this really helps with morale and community when we are so isolated and we are feeling like I can't get out of my house because I might get sick and die. And it's also really helpful because it promotes this, hey, it's okay, we can still connect and have that connection online via video. So one of my recommendations, something that's working out really well for us, is Zoom parties, and then just Zoom one-on-ones to check in on each other. Today I had a one-on-one with one of my peers, and it was just helpful for both of us to just touch base on where we are with our roles. And then outside of that, like people that we're meeting here on this Zoom, maybe you pick someone and you try to have a one-on-one and just talk shop or talk about what's going on with your life. Whether it's like some new hack that you found out or just whatever's on your mind. I think it's super healthy and something we need to do more of, especially as we're so isolated and in need of connection and just, relieving some stress by connecting with others.
Absolutely. I mean, it's human nature to want to connect. It's human nature to want to, hug and shake hands and do all that stuff. I know when this first started, you would walk up to people and they'd stick their hand out and you're like, nope, we're not doing that right now. But it's just so natural that's what you want to do. That's your go-to. And now that we've been kind of cooped up for a couple weeks, how do you get those outlets? How do you try and keep yourself sane? It's not, technology is a great tool and obviously that was a big topic of conversation. However, it's more than just the technology to be able to be productive and to be able to connect. So I want to thank you guys for all the great opinions. We're going to kind of shift into Q&A. So obviously we're not completely done right now. I know we had a lot of great points that came in through the chat. So if you guys see anything that you want to jump in from the chat, feel free. I'm going to pull some stuff out too. I know a couple of the points that we had here were great. Obviously, we talked a lot about mental health, and I saw that come up. I think, some of Lolita, some of your ideas of just to be creative. So you're not always a talking head on camera, but that it's something different. Again, make sure that you're making it personal. When we go to these networking events in person, you have a lot more opportunity to get your personality out there, to really connect with people. It's a lot more difficult here. Even doing this panel discussion, it's not as smooth and fluid as it would be if we were all sitting in a room together, being able to bounce ideas off each other. So it's making those adjustments. One of the points that I saw on here was talking about working on your business and not working in your business during this time. You have a pause. A lot of companies, and this is what I'm doing with a lot of my clients as well, is saying, look, it was really hard for me to track you guys down to work on these things to give you more time. You now have more time. So how can you maximize that time? I don't know if you guys want to jump in at all and talk about, being able to actually take advantage of this slowdown or this adjustment to work on your business more.
Yeah, so I'll jump on this one just because I think I've been struggling through this as well. Lolita brought up a great point in, questioning, do we need to always be fully productive? Do we need to always be operating at 100%? If in times where, like mental health is really a big issue for everyone right now, do we need to be like putting a full plate every night and just running down a rabbit hole of working on side projects, on side hustles and businesses and whatnot. And I think it's something that I've also been like questioning a lot of. I do have more time now that I don't have to commute 45 minutes, now that I don't have to spend as long getting ready in the morning, now that, I don't have the same limitations of like having to go to work every day. I do have more time. And so I've been splitting my time into doing things that really, help me mentally, but also spending more time than I would like to admit with like side projects. I think that it's something that makes me happy. And I've seen from a lot of my friends that they too are working on hobbies now. I don't know. I think that like if you look towards the last few recessions, some of the biggest companies in the world have emerged from periods of significant downturn. And I'm really curious to see moving forward who are going to be the titans in 3 to 5 years that emerged because of COVID. How do the like cultural societal changes that we're going through now bring about a new wave of whether it's technology or otherwise titans in the business world?
Absolutely. One of the other things I see kind of bouncing around the chat room here is the length of time that people are working now that they're working remote. I saw a couple people kind of chime in on this, and I know this is something that we're facing in our household as well. Before you got to work at a certain time, you worked a certain amount of hours, you took maybe a break for lunch, and then you knew you had to leave by a certain time to either get home for family or to beat rush hour traffic or to get to that networking event. All that's gone. You can get up when you want to. I mean, you still have meeting times and stuff like that. I know I came downstairs maybe the first or second week we were working, and I was trying to get stuff together, and at 7 o'clock I said to my wife, I said, are we gonna start doing dinner soon? She's still at her computer, she's still working, because that hard stop of I've got to get out of here and get home and do these things isn't there. What's kind of your thought process on how do you kind of separate the two? How do you not work even more and even crazier hours now that you're home, so that you can still have that time with your family or still have that mental break?
I'd like to pick this one up because this is something I struggle with. For any of you who do know me, you probably also know that I am a workaholic. And so this has only promoted workaholism. And one action that I've taken is I actually had my husband install Custodio, which is actually a children's Wi-Fi parental control type of technology, so that it will turn off my computer and my phone, or it won't let me access it after 8 p.m. because we are spending way too much time on screen. We are spending way too much time working, and I know it can feel real good, but unfortunately workaholism is an addiction. And I think that we don't talk about it because it's something that is status quo in the US. But for me, I'm taking precautions and saying, okay, after 8 p.m., my device is actually shut down, so I can't go back and use them. And I say this shamelessly, and I hope that also helps others, because I know this is a topic that is a little bit of a stigmatized topic. But it's definitely something where it makes sense. So you take some time for yourself, some mental breathing.
That is a excellent point. What has really helped me, I am time boxing all of my activities now. So like for work, let's say if I need to make like a product roadmap or something like that, I will block off time on my calendar saying, hey, I am going to spend 1 hour just tackling this. And then also what I have been doing is time boxing all of my kind of at home leisure activities. So, from like 5 to 6 o'clock run, from 6 to 8, work. So just time boxing all of your activities has really helped me.
No, I think that's a great point. You know, really kind of both of you had great tips and great ways to kind of separate work life from home life when that clear divide isn't there anymore. And I know as entrepreneurs, there's not a start time and a stop time. I think I saw that mentioned in the chat too. Obviously, you know, the entrepreneurial mentality is I'm going to work 7 days a week. I'm there when my clients need me. That's all great. That mentality should still be part of how you become an entrepreneur, how you grow your company. But at the same time, remember, there are other things outside of work to be focused on. And when there aren't those clear divides anymore, make sure that you create those divides.